The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host Brian Mitchell.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and I'm talking to you. You know, back in my day, when I was a little kid, there were so many cartoons on TV, not just the theatricals from years before that were dumped onto TV screens, and not just a Disney TV show. There were other cartoons too. And, yeah, we know about the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, but there were other studios too. And there were a whole bunch of little studios, boutique outfits that were doing their own series. And sometimes they didn't get beyond one show. Like Bob Clampett did Beanie and Cecil. That was actually based off of an earlier live-action puppet show back in 1949, 1950. So he did that. You had these studios doing like Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse. King Features was doing a whole bunch of 5-minute, 6-minute cartoons featuring Popeye and, Crazy Cat and Ignat Mouse. I remember those. They were also doing Snuffy Smith cartoons, doing some of those. Outfit in New York, Hal Seeger Productions, was doing Milton the Monster. So you had a bunch of smaller studios, aside from the DePatie Freeling studio starting up and Hanna-Barbera and Filmation. But there was another studio out there, and I think you remember Jay Ward. Jay Ward started in animation in the 50s. He worked on a show called Crusader Rabbit. And fast forward to the later 50s, he ended up selling a show called Rocky and Bullwinkle, or Rocky and His Friends. So many different titles. It's Rocky and Bullwinkle. But out of that came some other characters like Dudley Do-Right and the Fractured Fairy Tales. So when Jay Ward sold that show, when he went out there trying to get money to do it and getting a place to run it, it was a cereal company, actually an advertising agency tied into a cereal company, that produced it. And they produced it on a really low budget. And the whole idea was they're going to produce this show and market breakfast cereal from it. And so Ward was about the quality. Ward wanted the animation quality. He wanted the humor. So he got the humor. He didn't get quite the animation quality because the productions were sent to Mexico to a brand new studio that nobody knew how to animate. And so that was tough. But the people behind that, not Ward and Bill Scott, the people that were funding the show ended up starting up their own production company. And like I said, the whole purpose of it was to market breakfast cereal to kids. The company they started was Total Television Productions. And even though the motivation wasn't quality, really, good enough to have kids watch it and be interested in it, their focus was a lot different. It was to market the breakfast cereal. But they did some interesting shows. And those shows have kind of lived on today. Underdog is one of them. King Leonardo and His Subjects. There was also Tennessee Tuxedo and Commander McBragg. And there's so many of them. I can't even think of them. Go Go Gophers and a lot of different cartoons. I grew up on this stuff, and they were kind of fun. Even though they were really limited animation, they were fun cartoons. Maybe not as brilliant as Jay Ward's creations, but they were still good cartoons. And so today we have on the one, the only, Mark Arnold. He's going to talk about the Total Television Productions. He wrote the book on Total Television cartoons. So we're going to have him on in just a few minutes. It should be a good one. Don't go away.
Cartoonerific is the place to be to celebrate hand-drawn animated cartoons. The Cartoonerific podcast features interviews with the magic makers behind your favorite animated cartoons, with episodes uploaded every Friday. Or visit the Cartoonerific blog featuring articles about classic cartoon animation. At the Cartoonerific Gallery, view original animation art and memorabilia from your favorite animated films and TV shows. The company store features exclusive swag from the Cartoonerific universe. And coming soon, brand new world premiere cartoons on the Cartoonerific channel. It's all here. Join the fun at www.cartoonerific.com. That's cartoon, ERIFIC.com. It's Cartoonerific, saving the universe one funny cartoon at a time. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, welcome. We have a very special guest today. We're going to be talking about these wonderful cartoons that were actually put on the air because a cereal company wanted cartoons. That's part of the reason why these cartoons existed. They were produced in New York, I believe, and then actually the pre-pro went in New York, and then they were produced in Mexico by the same studio that did all the Rocky and Bullwinkle animation. And so it was an important studio in my mind as I was growing up. You had, Tennessee Tuxedo. You had the Go Go Gophers. You had Commander McBragg. And then I guess the Beagles. And then the big one was Underdog. And there's a great book out. It's called Created and Produced by Total Television Productions. And the author of that book is here. He has another book out, which is TTV Scrapbook. And it's basically the companion to the Total Television Productions book that he did. Please welcome Mark Arnold. Thank you for coming back, Mark.
Thanks. How are you doing?
I am doing great. So what prompted you to write this book? Because I don't think anybody else would touch it. And, with your other book, Think Pink, which a great book. The only thing that we found on that was maybe something that maybe Jerry Beck put together, like almost like a scrapbook of all the Pink Panther stuff. And you went in depth on all that material. So the Total TV cartoons, we don't really see them too much today, do we?
You can see a few of them on streaming, some Underdogs and things like that. You can see the Underdog movie, which the less said about that's better, but that is on Disney Plus. And there are 2 DVD sets, which I helped compile. One is the complete Tennessee Tuxedo, and the other is complete Underdog. Mm-hmm. And we did those about 10 years ago. So there's interviews with people that are no longer with us, like Larry Storch and Bradley Bolke and Buck Biggers that we interviewed doing commentaries on the cartoons. So those were put up by Shout Factory. They're still in print, so that's probably the best way to see them now.
That's great. So how'd you start this book? I mean, obviously you felt there was a need for it, and so how'd that come about?
Well, I mean, it has its origins of just I like cartoons and everything like that.
Wow, that's cool.
My original love, of course, is Harvey Comics. If you know my history, I did a fanzine about Harvey for a number of years and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
After I got a book that was the best of the Harveyville Fun Times, I was writing articles for various other publications. And I don't know if you've heard of this publication called Hogan's Alley.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he publishes like once a year or so. I think in recent times it's been a little bit longer because of the pandemic. But
did that come out like 4 times a year at one point? The Hogan's
at least like twice a year. I don't think it's been that frequent. 4 times a year would be great, but I think he's now like once a year, once every other year. So it's really every so often. But when he was really going good in the aughts, the 2000s or whatever, he asked me to write some pieces for him, and we would discuss things. But one of them, he just asked me out of the blue, and he goes, "Now, whatever happened to that studio that did Underdog and everything like that? Have you ever thought about that?" And I go, "Of course, but there's no credits on the show except for the voice actors, so I don't even know who to contact."
Right. I mean, Joe Harris was involved with that show, but I don't think, did he get a credit on the show? I mean,
no, none of them got credit on the show.
I just remember the gang. Well, it wasn't gang credits. It was just basically at the end of the Underdog show. It'd be like, tune in for the next Underdog. I'm sure there was a sponsor on there.
Well, there's credits listed, but it was all the voice actors.
It was voice actors, right? It was Don Adams,
Bradley Bolke, Larry Storch, Wally Cox, Don Adams, all those names. And,
right.
But yeah, it didn't say made by. It would just say like the title says, created and produced by Total Television Productions. That was the credit.
Right.
And so nobody knew who they were. Everybody thought, oh, this is just another Jay Ward thing because they look kind of like Jay Ward cartoons, except the joke is always, oh, but they're not funny. Well,
yeah, but they were fun. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, who could forget, Go Go Gophers with,
right.
I forgot, the exact phrasing of the line, but it was like, hee, we have fun.
Yeah,
was that Go Go Gophers? It was Indian stereotypes, wasn't it? With the Go Go.
Of course, yeah. But they were gophers. I don't know. It's forgiven, I suppose.
I don't know.
They're just gophers wearing feathers. Sorry. No, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. In today's politically correct climate, probably not the best idea they came up with. But I don't know. They're still fun cartoons. I mean, if anything, they're trying to be historically accurate. They have the cavalry trying to run Indians off the land. So that really happened. So,
there you go. But it was just the Gophers were the heroes, I guess,
Yeah, they didn't leave. So
right.
I was a big Rocky and Bullwinkle fan too growing up.
Yeah.
And Keith Scott, who did the voice of Bullwinkle numerous times, wrote that great book called The
Moose That Roared.
I can't think of it. Yeah, The Moose That Roared. Thank you. I was thinking, what was the name of that book? It's the Rocky and Bullwinkle book that Keith Scott.
Oh, it's a great
The Moose That Roared.
It's a really great book, and I mean it documents everything. I mean he had access to the Ward archives, and so there's recording session info on there. I mean he got some key people to interview, and it's a thick book. It's not a you would think a book like that would probably be like 150 pages. I think it's somewhere around almost close to 400, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so similar to like on the Patty Freeling book, part of the reason why I wrote that one, we mentioned Jerry Beck's Pink Panther book, and I said, well, what about all these other cartoons? There's like a little paragraph that just talks about, oh yeah, they did some TV cartoons. I was like, what? So that inspired that.
Right.
In the Moose That Roared, it just kind of gave lip service to Total Television by saying, oh yes, General Mills, the sponsor, also produced cartoons based out of New York, and he even said, but these weren't very good.
Right.
Like, what? I like them. They are different than Rocky and Bullwinkle and the stuff that came out of Jay Ward.
Right.
But, they have a similar kind of feel to them in a certain respect. I mean, especially as you go later on. Like I always say this about Jay Ward is the Hoppity Hooper show is probably the best show that Total Television ever produced.
Right.
Because
they did it all in Los Angeles.
A lot like,
right.
Yeah. Total Television show.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the Total TV cartoons. I think they even kind of mixed them up with the Rocky and Bullwinkles because it was basically it was what Pat Ward was the and Pat was involved. Pat was involved with the Total TV cartoons, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what that stood for is Producers Associates of Television, and Ward was just so for the other one. It was Pat Leonardo. The Leonardo they used for King Leonardo, and then later they switched to just TV because they had other characters. But you sometimes still see Leonardo used, and that's what's referenced to as King Leonardo.
Right.
In the case of the commonalities, so both Jay Ward and Total Television shared the sponsor, General Mills.
Mm-hmm.
They both shared the PAT, which was this company called that was made by this guy named Peter Peach.
Yes.
And he marketed both shows.
Mm-hmm.
And as time went on, he was the one who made like compilation shows. Like there was a Go Go Gophers show and there was a Dudley Do-Right show. Now those consisted completely of repeats, but at that point they were mixing and matching. So you would see on a Dudley Do-Right show a Commander McBragg, and you'd see on the Go Go Gophers show a Fractured Fairy Tales. So he didn't care. They were all under his umbrella, and the shows were already produced. And then later in syndication, when Underdog and Tennessee, everything appeared everywhere. You'd see Rocky and Bullwinkle and Tennessee Tuxedo or whatever.
Right.
It was a big mess.
When they started that was the motivation for them to get in with Jay Ward was really to produce cheap animation, and Ward was trying to do a quality show with good writing, like really really funny. He wanted to make them funny, and so he basically got into bed with Peter Peach and Pat, and I think they hated it. I think they hated the whole experience because every time they would try to get money, they were very stingy about that. And the cartoons, and now according to the Moose That Roared, according to that book, basically, I think they had less than $3,000 to produce a cartoon, and then when they were running into these difficulties, they raised the budget a little bit. So when they were kind of wrapping up on I don't think they were wrapping up on the Rocky and Bullwinkles before they started the Total TV productions.
No.
So when did they start? They were
in the second season, yeah. It was called Rocky and His Friends originally, and that debuted in 1959. The animation was done by Valmar, which is the precursor to Gamma Productions down in Mexico. It's the same company, but they just changed the name somewhere along the line.
Right.
And unfortunately, Jay Ward got the brunt of Gamma ramping up. So you see the worst animation mistakes possible, because it wasn't like these guys were just off the street like the Moose That Roared implies. I mean, they actually got artists and real animators and things like that. And a lot of people went from the States and worked down there. I interviewed one of them for my Total Television scrapbook who worked on all the shows. His name's Harvey Siegel. Yeah. And he kind of gave me the heads up saying, it wasn't as bad as what Keith Scott said. I mean, so yes, we were learning, but I mean, he was comparing to, like, if you look at the first seasons of The Simpsons, they're kind of rough, especially that first season. The animation's really rough compared to now. So, that's what Rocky and Bullwinkle was like. So, the first season was kind of rough. They worked it out. And then as time went on, I mean, it wasn't like sophisticated Disney animation, but it certainly got better.
Well, for TV, for TV, I mean, when you look at the Simpsons came from the Tracy Ullman show,
Right.
Okay, so
And those segments are really, creaky.
oh yeah,
They're funny. They're funny, but the animation's like all wonky and everything.
right. They
So,
probably, pretty much like Rocky and Bullwinkle, they didn't have much money, so it's kind of like
yeah.
you're working with very limited budgets. Of course, when the show's a hit and you're producing more, they're throwing more money at it. And Simpsons is what now, over $1 million an episode, or somewhere around that. And so I know Rocky and Bullwinkle got more money. They didn't get $1 million an episode, not even the equivalent at the time. And the show was produced for what, 5 years?
Yeah,
it went on for about 5 years in production.
Yeah, it was 2 years. It was Rocky and his friends, and then they basically had a title change to the Bullwinkle show. So there's never officially a show called Rocky and Bullwinkle, but it's easy to refer it to that way because it's essentially the same show.
It's the same show. Yeah, same cartoons.
And I think they changed. If I remember correctly, I think they changed networks, which is why they changed the title. I think it was on ABC originally, and then went to NBC.
I would think that with the success of that Total TV, like Peter Peach and those guys, would want to stay with Jay Ward, but I don't think Jay Ward wanted to stay with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the story goes why that Total Television was formed in the first place is because of Jay Ward pushing the envelope and Bill Scott, the writer and co-producer and everything. They were pushing the envelope of having Russian espionage and all these weird topics. Hey, we just want a simple kids show. Mm-hmm. That's what General Mills and the ad agency Dancer Fitzgerald Sample wanted. And so they actually kind of formed Total Television in an attempt to either shape up Jay Ward, or they could dump him and keep Total Television, and Total Television could produce the cartoons more in the way that they wanted. And so the first season of Rocky and his friends has the moon fuel story where they're going to the moon and trying to beat the Russians to the moon. And there's all this weirdness and everything compared to what they were wanting. And so the following year in 1960, that's when King Leonardo and his short subjects came on.
Right.
And, you get King Leonardo and, he's just kind of angry because his brother and his Biggie Rat and Itchy brother are trying to overthrow the government, which I guess could be considered subversive, but certainly not to the level,
right.
They were doing it at Jay Ward. And then, there's The Hunter, and those are pretty simple cop and robber type episodes. And then Tooter the Turtle, where he was trying to become, something. And then by the end, he realized, I don't want to be a football player, or I don't want to be a taxi driver, or I don't want to be this. I just want to be myself, Right. I need to be changed back by Mr. Wizard the Lizard, things like that. So simple, but interesting concepts. So.
Right. So when they were producing, do you know how much they spent on these shows? I mean, was it? I can't imagine it being too much
but
more.
I don't have it memorized now. No.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been more than $10,000 per episode. I mean, Or there were 5-minute cartoons, right?
Yeah, for the most part. The only ones that were longer, things like Commander McBragg or Bullwinkle's Corner or Mr. Know-It-All, they were a minute and a half.
Right.
Most episodes are 5 minutes, or like Underdog pieced, 5-minute pieces to form a 4-part story or something. The only one that was longer, which was still in 2 parts, but it was like 9 minutes, was Tennessee Tuxedo.
Did you ever find out who were the artists involved? I mean, okay, like I said, Joe Harris was one of the artists, but who else was involved?
The designer of all the characters. So
every single one?
And
I know Underdog.
One, so
wow.
Yeah. So every single of the main ones. So, I mean, he came up with a list, which I have one in the new scrapbook, because I said, he said, I think I designed 100 characters, and I think I came up with 102 or something like that. So he was pretty right on the money. They designed 100 characters, that, weren't like background characters. Like if it's somebody like a person in the background, look up in the sky, it's probably just one of the other animators designed a generic character. But I mean, the real starring characters, those were all designed by either Chet Stover, who was the co-writer, or and one of the owners too, or Joe Harris. Now, Chet had a more realistic art style, and he wasn't trying to design the characters, but sometimes he'd like do a simple sketch and say, hey, why don't you make a character look kind of like this, hand it to Joe, and then Joe would make it into the kind of total television Jay Ward look, that everybody knows and loves. So that's what his specialty was.
So who were the people directing it? Who was storyboarding it? Who was writing it? Do you know any of that?
Yeah, not all the episodes, most of the episodes, Gary Mooney was one of the people storyboarding a lot of them. I have a list in the back of the original book, The Created and Produced, of all the people that I could find that worked, that I could get their names. So some are of Mexican descent. One of the animators was Romana Arambula.
Right.
Yeah, he worked in the States also. He also drew the Mickey Mouse comic strip for a number of years.
Right.
But he got his start working at Gamma and doing those shows.
Right.
I'd have to kind of go through.
Yeah, that's okay. Do you know if they were writing them in New York? Were they doing the pre-pro in New York?
Yeah, they're pretty much. So the four principals, let me tell you this, and then this will kind of straighten it out here. So the four principals who own Total Television that I discovered after, making calls and finding this and that and the other, was Buck Biggers, Chet Stover, Joe Harris, and Tread Covington.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, Buck, Chet, and Joe all work for Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, which exists now as an ad agency, but it's called Saatchi and Saatchi.
Ah, right.
So,
wow.
But that's where they came from. Tread came from a different ad agency, which name escapes me from now, but it was further south, like North Carolina or something like that.
Right.
But they knew of him.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, when General Mills, there's a guy at General Mills named Gordon Johnson, who was the guy who was kind of heading up the whole account with Buck and Chet and the Jay Ward people and everything else like that. And he went to Buck and Chet and said, hey, we're having a little bit of trouble with Jay Ward. Can you come up with some ideas for some shows? We'll have you create your own studio. And they kind of did in the background on the side while they were working at the ad agency, because if it didn't work, they didn't want to be fired. So, because this is a guy, granted, General Mills is a big client, so they fired him. The General Mills might say, well, see you later. You fired those guys, so they probably, but still they wanted to kind of do it on the down low. Right. And so they worked their day jobs still for the first year, creating the King Leonardo characters. And then once that became a hit, then they left the company, and they brought Joe along with them. And Joe worked like feverish hours. You asked who did storyboarding. I mean, he did a lot of storyboarding himself. He did a lot of actual animating himself.
Wow.
Not everything, but, because a lot of it was shipped out to Mexico, but, some things had to get done. And, so when I interviewed Joe at one point, he was saying, I was working like 18-hour days for like 5 years, He says, I can't do that anymore. And I said, wow.
Wow. So,
excuse me.
Yeah. Do you know anything about the production time, or how many cartoons they produced of like King Leonardo?
They had a set amount, and it's listed in the book. If I can find it, I can probably tell you. But the way it kind of worked, according to Tread, I didn't mention Tread. So Tread was the business guy, and he arranged all the audio recordings and everything like that. With Ben Stern, who is Howard Stern's father, still with us. He's like 98 years old.
Wow.
And they would arrange recording sessions for all the different cast members to come in and do their recordings. Later on, a lot of recording was also done in Mexico. In fact, a lot of the songs were recorded in Mexico, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But the voice artist never went to Mexico, so a lot of that stuff was done in New York. So,
right. Well, Storch,
King Leonardo.
Storch just passed away. Larry Storch.
Yes.
And what characters did he do? I know he did like Commander McBragg, right? Or no,
Actually,
Mr. Whoopi.
No, he didn't do that.
Mr. Whoopi.
Mr. Whoopi is his main character.
Right.
He didn't do a lot for Total Television. I mean, he did little incidental characters. The one that did a lot was the one who did Commander McBride was Kenny Delmar. He did the Hunter. I can look all these up. It's like
Right.
He did narration for the Tennessee Tuxedo show.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. Oh, look.
Chumley was Bradley.
Chumley was Bradley Bulkey.
Right.
And his other big claim to fame, he did voices of the Ghostly Trio on the Casper show in the early 60s.
Right.
And he also did the voice of Jangle Bell on the Rankin Bass Year Without the Santa Claus special.
Interesting.
I mean, he did other voices over the years, but those are like the prominent ones. He also was on that old Kennedy First Family album. He did voices on that too.
So. Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, these are all New York-based studios.
Yeah.
And, hey, I'm based in New York. I used to pass by all these places, but where do you know where Gamma was? Not Gamma. Do you know where they were as far as Total TV? Do you know where?
I have their address in here. I don't have it memorized again, but it wasn't really a street address. See, I mean,
right.
Because I asked that. I said they had stationery. It does have an address on there, and I said, "Well, is that something you could go to, like a Hanna-Barbera or something?" No, it was just kind of like an office space. Is like a mail drop. I go, well, that's disappointing.
So there must have been freelancing a lot of this material.
Yeah, a lot of times they worked out of their home.
Wow.
Now the Gamma Animation Company, they were in the heart of Mexico City.
Yep.
And I don't know, all the addresses are in the book. I just don't have them memorized.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
Just generalize.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I heard a story that there was an earthquake in Mexico and it split Gamma into where there was actually a gap between one side of the building and the other side. And I don't know if they had a plank there or something.
Yeah, so that is all legend. That's totally untrue, according to Harvey Siegel. And that interview is in my Total Television scrapbook. He didn't have kind words when I interviewed him. I didn't get. Here's the funny thing. When I did the first book, I was trying to find out how many people worked there and whether they were still around, and try to talk to as many people as I could.
Right.
Harvey Siegel, I made a mistake in the first book, and I said that he passed away. And the first book came out, and I found out he didn't.
Wow.
He might have now, which is unfortunate. But so the original book came out in 2009. I interviewed Harvey Siegel in 2014. So now I had this interview, and I was like thinking, what do I do? Do I update my book or what? And I just held on to it until I got around doing the new book. But anyway, he did not have kind words to say about the moose that roared, because he says, it makes it sound like Mexico is totally third world and, total stereotypes. Everybody's wearing sombreros and they just picked up people off the street like at Home Depot or something to do the animation here. And he says it was not like that at all. And like in the States, if there was a huge earthquake that split a building in two, they wouldn't allow people to work there. They wouldn't. They would have condemned the building,
right?
Relocated. Yeah. So I mean, it was just made up stories. He was.
It's funny. It's funny though, but it's too bad that's not true.
Probably made up by Jay Ward himself, because he hated the Gamma people just because he didn't want the animation done down there, and as soon as he could, he got out of there. So I mean, he did. So talking about Jay Ward temporarily, he did the Rocky and Bullwinkles down in Mexico.
Right.
He did not do Dudley Do Right in Mexico. That was done in the States.
Right.
In Hollywood. He did not do Fractured Fairy Tales, except for a very few of them down in Mexico.
Right.
And then when you go to the next show, you did Hoppity Hooper down there, and then that was it. So when you get to George of the Jungle, Super Chicken, Tom Slick, all that was done with studios in Hollywood. So he was done. He hated them. He didn't like them. The Total Television people, they were kind of more happy to work with them. They weren't ecstatic, but I mean, they thought, they did decent work. Joe Harris said he went down there once to see what was going on. About that time, they were doing Underdog and Klondike Cat. Those were the series they were working on that he oversaw. And he said, yeah, they got their act together. And so he was happy, and they probably would have continued on longer, but just the nature of how it was operating, Jay Ward pulled out, and then after Underdog, they did the Beagles. It wasn't very successful,
Right.
and so it was really hard to sell more series. And so basically they were closed by 1967.
Right.
They the Mexican studio kind of hung on there till about 1970, just producing animation for General Mills spots and a few other things.
Right.
That
Probably
was
more
that,
Rocky and Bullwinkle stuff, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, but effectively everything was done by 67, but it kind of limped along with Harvey till 1970. That
seems to be the time when all these New York studios just started shutting down, because Terry Toons, I think Famous Studios, they closed down around 67, 68. And then same thing, Terry Toons was toast by then. Right. Yeah, so it just seems like they all were shuttered. And which is too bad, but it just seems like it was a temporary operation anyway. It was just for the purpose of marketing breakfast cereal by General Mills.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But,
there's another studio totally different, separate from all these, but they have the same look too, called Ed Graham Productions.
Oh, that's right.
They did Linus the Lionhearted, and that's a whole series of cereal mascots together.
Oh my God. Yeah, I remember that.
That was Post Cereal, not General Mills, so they're the competitors.
So Underdog was made into a balloon for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, but Linus was too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so was Bullwinkle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, crazy.
So, they were popular characters, it's like they didn't have such rules back then. So, you could make it, it's kind of funny. They got more lax later on, and, you got stuff like He-Man and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
GoBots and Transformers and stuff. But there was a long period. You can't make a toy into a cartoon and a cartoon into a toy, and all these weird rules,
Yeah.
And you can't have the actual cartoon advertise some product on that show.
That's actually,
for example,
when did that come about? Like in the 70s? Was it the late 70s or the 80s? Well, He-Man was a toy before it became a.
Yeah. But where you had like there's ads with Underdog advertising Cheerios, so those were made, and Tennessee Tuxedo doing Frostios, and Tooter the Turtle doing Frostios. You can see them all on YouTube. So at least through the 60s, it was still possible to have a character advertise a product.
Right.
So
I
think it was the early 70s. I don't know the exact date when that switched.
Yeah, I don't know. You had Quisp and Quake, and you had Captain Crunch, which was basically these little cartoons in between the cartoons. And I'm surprised they didn't make
by Jay Ward too. So
yeah. No, it's they're wonderful. They're wonderful little cartoons. They stand by themselves. So with the total TV output, who ended up owning these things? It's like because I hear that it's tied up with General Mills, and probably Saatchi and Saatchi owns it now. There's a little bit of ownership like that way, so they could actually, if they wanted to, for years it's been part of this thing called the program exchange. And when I worked in TV briefly in the 90s for about 5 years, and we aired all those program exchange shows. Right.
And, so they air, and Rocky and Bullwinkle was one of those too. So, and Underdog, and a few others like Dennis the Menace and Space Cadets, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Barbera show.
I actually have I have a celluloid from that.
And Program Exchange did some live action shows too. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they're in big business throughout the 80s and 90s, and then it kind of fell by the wayside as cable took over, and then of course streaming and everything like that. So I think they still have the rights to syndicate it. It's just nobody really wants to. How it worked, it was a program exchange where the programs would air instead of a TV station paying to air the show. You'd air it for free, but you'd also have to throw a couple ads in there for, whatever products they wanted to advertise. So, but TV station got, product on the show, a show on the air, and they didn't have to pay for it.
Right.
And
they made some money.
And the ad agency got some ads on the air, and they didn't have to pay for it. So that's how that worked.
Right. Well, interesting. I'll tell you, I think it was easier to sell a show back in the day because all you had to do was just pitch it to the the company. So it's like Hanna-Barbera pitched to Kellogg's. So it's like Kellogg's, once they decided, oh yeah, we love these characters, it was like they put it on the air. It wasn't a matter of, they just shopped around for, what network they could put it on, and then they would get it aired. And it's the same thing, syndication, same thing. So my bet here is that, they just, they produce the cartoons, they produce them for as cheap as they could produce them and still make them entertaining.
I mean, how it originally worked was, this comes from radio, is the sponsors would own the thing, basically. And they would say, oh, we're General Mills. Let's say CBS. We got this great new show about this flying superhero dog. You want it? And they go, okay, and it's like, but it slowly turned. And this is what hurt both Jay Ward and Total Television, because they didn't have their own animation studios in-house.
Right.
See, Hanna-Barbera did, so it got to the point where they weren't calling the shots. It was the network calling the shots. And of course, like you said, everybody wanted to do everything as cheaply as possible. Why go to these smaller companies like Jay Ward or Total Television with their kind of occasional ideas when we can go to the big powerhouse, Hanna-Barbera? They have ideas all the time, even though they're recycling Scooby-Doo, but they have all these ideas all the time, and they have the animators right in-house, and they'll get it done quickly and on time and cheaply. Let's do that. And
they have the control.
They
have the control because it's in the States.
Yeah, exactly. And so you see in the 70s, Hanna-Barbera just basically pushes everyone off the map. Patty Freeland got a few shows on there, maybe one a season.
Yeah.
Rankin Bass got a couple, one a season maybe.
And Filmation had Fat Albert and something else.
Well, for a while, but then after a bit, they just said, we're just going to do live action shows. And they gave up a lot of the animation, So, interesting how it evolved during the 70s. So,
yeah, I mean, with Filmation, it seems like if they weren't selling that was a pre-existing concept, they had no shows on the air, because it was basically they redid Gilligan, and so Gilligan's Island, it was Gilligan's Planet, I believe, and then so they were just rehashing Star Trek. Remember Star Trek? So they had Star Trek series,
but they all ended up doing that. I mean, Hanna-Barbera did a Genie, I Dream of Genie show called Genie, and then they did Partridge Family. They just set it in the future, but it was a Partridge Family show,
right? And
they did Fonz and the Happy Days Gang and Laverne and Shirley cartoons and the Dukes of Hazzard cartoons,
right? Three Stooges, the robotic Three Stooges, my favorite.
What's popular on TV? Let's make a cartoon show out of it.
Right?
It's like. And how can Total Television or Jay Ward, that likes to do like kind of original stuff, compete with that? So that was pretty much the end of them.
You can't. So. What's old is new. So that's.
I didn't answer an earlier question. You asked me. So who owns it now? I mean, it's like, so Total Television. After about 1970. The four of them kind of met up and just basically said, we're not selling anything. Let's cut our losses. We've made some money on this, and let's just stop. Now, they didn't stop existing as a company. They just stopped making new cartoons. And so they just got profits from the music, and they got profits from the repeat airings of the show. And Chet and Buck, and I think even Joe, went back to Dancer Fitzgerald sample during the 70s for a brief time. Buck went to NBC for a while, and he was key in getting the peacock back on the NBC logo, because they had dumped it. And he says, what's going on here? You're the Peacock Network, and you got rid of it.
Right.
So, and they all retired, and lived on their lives and everything. And of course, they've passed away in the recent years, but they eventually did get an offer to sell the company. I forget the order. I think it was Lorne Michaels and Broadway Video first.
Right.
And they bought everything, Total Television, except for the music rights. So the descendants of the owners still own the rights to all the songs, the theme songs, and so anytime you see Underdog, they still get royalties for that.
For the Underdog theme, and
yeah, as long as they're using the original themes. Like there's a time where they cut off all the themes just to be cheap, and it's like so.
No, it's important.
Like
Those openings are really important to a show.
Right.
And
let's see, Golden Books had it for a while, and Hallmark Cards had it for a while, and it just went on and on. Classic Media had them till pretty recently, and then now it's owned by NBC. DreamWorks was for a while, and then now it's owned by NBC Universal, which owns DreamWorks, and Classic Media, which owns everything else. So that's how that works.
Wow, that's crazy. No, it's crazy how these cartoons have changed hands.
Yeah.
Wow. So what's the
frustrating?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was going to say the frustrating thing is the changing hands. Like when I was doing the DVD collections, they had pristine prints. This is Shout Factory. They had pristine prints of all the cartoons. I mean, they're gorgeous.
Right.
But they had no audio. And they go, I don't know if we can put these out. And, I said, well, I have all the cartoons on bootleg DVDs. And they go, well, send them to us. And so I did.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the audio. So the audio you hear on those DVDs, they sound good. But, I mean, they could have sounded fantastic if the original audio was retained. I mean, they still sound pretty good because it's just audio off the syndicated TV prints. But still. It's amazing that that got lost
on the DVDs. So you're going to get pristine pictures. So you're going to get a lot of good color with that, right? Yeah. Because I just remember watching these washed out prints in New York. Film fades, and so these television stations were running them, and they look brown and gray with and probably due to faded prints. So
yeah. The original ones looked really sharp because one of the things that they didn't get easily down in Mexico was actual animation cell paint. It was very expensive to get in Mexico, and for some reason, no one thought to just ship it down from LA or something.
Right.
So they would use actual latex house paint.
I heard that. Yeah.
Now that is a true story, and but the good consequence of using the house paint is it has really lush, full color that's probably better than what you'd get on just typical animation cell paint. So
there was a cell paint called cell vinyl. And somebody told me that the secret to that, to get it to adhere to the cells, because, if you try to write on a piece of celluloid with like a marker or whatever, it doesn't adhere. It's repelling it. So it's watercolor paint, but basically what they used to do was take this and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I heard they mixed it with Elmer's glue. And so the Elmer's glue had white in it, so it actually lightened up the color. So you're not really getting a deep, but from what I understand, that was part of the formula. And I don't know if that's true, and I'll probably get sued or something.
No, I think Harvey Siegel did confirm that. He actually talks about how they did, and he goes into more depth than I would normally do, but I left it because it was interesting. He was talking about how the different layers of cells needed different grades of paint color and stuff like that. And it's amazing all the technical stuff they had to do just to make these simple cartoons.
Yeah, today with computer technology, you can have layer upon layer upon layer of animation cells in the computer, and there's no change in the color from layer to layer. But back then, when you had a cell, the cell would actually, you put that over the background, that's fine. But once you start layering the cells, every time you
Yeah.
put a cell on top of another cell, it darkened it a little bit.
Right.
Just very slight. But then when you get a stack of them, it's kind of like they become like gray. You can still see the images below, but it's the layer of the cell that has some sort of a tint to it, which you can't iron out. I guess they could not get that out. It's just
Right. And of course, they did tons of layering because it's easier on these cartoons to move one character than have somebody animate a cell with 10 characters on it and do it again, do it again, do it again, do it
right.
again.
You'd have a held cell of maybe some Native Americans, and then you'd have another cell of the character, and then it might just be full figure with missing an arm, and then then basically you'd have the eyes on another layer, and then the mouth on another layer, and then I think there was a limit. You couldn't really go more than like 4 or 5 of these.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and then but the thing is that because of the cell layers, you had to brighten up the color below it. So, if these characters, they would look like they were a dark brown rather than a light brown with the cell layers over it. And so, yeah.
So they would learn how to mix the paints for those different layers. So if you're using the bottom layer brown or something, it would be a lighter brown than the top layer brown. So it would all look even, once you photographed it. So,
exactly.
Amazing what they did, because nowadays with the flick of a switch on a computer, you just type it in. I want them all to be universal brown number 22 or whatever. Boom,
and that's
done.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And you can have 100 layers there and it's all going to be perfect. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. So do you know, like when they did these when they did these cartoons, I mean, these things had to be delivered pretty quick, I would imagine. Yep. And I know they had to keep that studio busy. Do you know what they did in between? Like after Rocky and Bullwinkle, and then, they had basically they had to complete these shows in a certain amount of time. What did they do in the off time? Do you know?
Well, they also did the animation for a lot of the cereal commercials. So, I mean, they were doing Trix commercials, Cocoa Puffs, and other things down there as well. So it wasn't just
the actual cartoon.
Shows. Yeah. And I think they even took on, if what Harvey says is correct, is other sponsors. If somebody wanted to use Gamma Animation for their commercial spot, even if they weren't affiliated with General Mills, they weren't closed to other people coming down there. So, they probably animated commercials that we don't even know about, that I don't even know about, because they probably didn't look like Underdog or something like that, but it was still animation.
Sure.
That's the tricky part when watching old animated commercials or segments of, say, like Sesame Street or something like that. Some are easy to tell. Some are like, who knows who did these?
Yeah, it could have been done by a student from, School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. You don't know, because a lot of these, especially these cartoons, didn't have any credits other than voice artists. So,
I mean, an example is like, those 1960s Popeyes that were done, they're attributed to King Features, and Paramount did a bunch of them.
Right.
Did, the earlier cartoons, but they farmed them out to about 12 different studios around the world to do different ones.
Well, I think the big
Larry
ones
Harmon did some.
That's right.
Al
Jack
Seeger did some.
Jack
Kinney
Kinney.
did some.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not what happened here with Underdog, but, it could have happened had, they done this, we need some help and ship some of the Popeyes down to Gamma. It didn't happen, but, it could have, because
easily.
we're available, so,
Yeah, easily, but it would have looked like Rocky and Bullwinkle, with...
But my point is, so you're asking in between time. So, I mean, they were pretty, filled up with all the series at one point. At one point, they were doing Tennessee Tuxedo, the Underdog show, and Hoppity Hooper all at the same time. So,
Wow.
They had to kind of shift around and figure out how to do it, so they weren't like doing all 3 series exactly at the same time. So they had to do them in shifts, so they do some of the Hoppity Hoopers. Okay, we're done with those. Now let's go back to Tennessee Tuxedo, do a few more of those.
Right.
And it was basically, from what I was told by Tread Covington, because you asked how many episodes did they do, it was basically when General Mills said, all right, got enough of those. That's enough. Start working on something else. So,
Right.
it was usually between like 39 to about 52 episodes.
Wow.
Usually, but there's some that are 48. Like I think Go Go Gophers is 48.
Are we talking about the 5-minute cartoons? There were 39 of the 5-minute.
Yeah. So there's like 39 Tudor Turtles. There's like 48 Commander McBrags. 48. I don't know why they came up with this number. Go Go Gophers, and then there's like 52 Underdogs or something like that, but there's multi-parts, so actually there's like 104 if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
it's really crazy with the TV cartoons, because it was basically these stations were clamoring. I mean, they really wanted the product. It was like filler for them. It was just cheap filler, because as cheap as they were to produce when they distributed these films around the country, the stations were acquiring them for nothing. I mean, really, each station would pay a certain amount of money, and they would have that cartoon. They could run that for, I don't know what the deal would be. I don't know if they would have it permanently or just be like I would imagine they would get it for like 3 years or a year or something like that.
Yeah. But once they put it in syndication, I mean, things like Underdog and Tennessee Tuxedo did much better in syndication than it ever did on Saturday morning.
Right.
Because multiple stations, even in the same market, could run it. And we mentioned Peter Peach earlier. He also did the merchandising. Well, he wasn't terribly successful with merchandising in the 60s. He got a few things out there, especially for King Leonardo. Right. It was like a board game and a costume and a few other things. But Tennessee Tuxedo, there was very little merchandise in comparison. And Underdog, there were some things. And we're talking about in the 60s when the shows were new. Cut to the 70s. Now, there's an Underdog comic book. There's Underdog merchandise. I see weird things all the time. I've seen rubber slippers or thongs or something for kids. I've seen dartboards. Any little doodad little rack toy that you can think of. I've seen it with Underdog magnets and stuff like that. Yeah. Not so much Tennessee Tuxedo, but I have seen some. But that was when they really merchandise these cartoons to death, because they weren't making new cartoons. So where else can you make money? Here's a way to do it. Yeah, we'll put out toys. And of course, being in the tradition of cheap cartoons, make cheap toys. So
there you go. Hey, look, so the book is created and produced by Total Television Productions, and then the sister book, which is a gorgeous book, has photographs of the Underdog balloon, and
it's in color too.
It's in color. It's in full color, Technicolor. No, it's not Technicolor in the book. That book is the TTV scrapbook, and you should go out and buy 3 copies, because you're going to wear one out, right, Mark?
Or gift them to your friends.
Gift them to your friends. And if they don't want them,
holidays are coming up. It might be August, but it's just around the corner.
That's right. If they don't want them, you could always regift them. So there you go. So, all right, Mark, thanks for being on. And, it was a fun conversation.
All right. Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at CARTOONERIFIC.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Hey, thank you, Mark Arnold, for coming on today and talking about the Total TV cartoons. I grew up on that stuff. It has a fond place in my heart. So I really enjoyed those cartoons like Underdog and Tennessee Tuxedo and Commander McBrag and all that stuff. Anyway, if you'd like to buy Mark's book, I know it's available on Amazon. You can go there and buy it. But support what Mark's doing, because he's writing about stuff that nobody else is, and that's pretty interesting. Anyway, if you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe. If you really like what you're listening to, please tell a friend. That is the biggest compliment in the world. I love to hear people, they say, my friend recommended your podcast to me, and I'm really getting a lot out of it, so thank you. Thank you for doing it. I love to hear that. If you have any comments, please send an email to me. It's brian@cartoonerific.com. I do read everything, and if we hear something interesting, we'll play it on the show, or read it on the show at least. Anyway, we have a bunch of great guests coming up in the weeks ahead. Just want you to know that. So anyway, this is Brian. I want you to have a great day. I want you to have an excellent week. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for tuning in. See ya.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.